You're not a cultural fit for this level of leadership. The words didn't land softly. They cut clean, deliberate, like a decision already made before Vanessa Hale even took her seat. The conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked downtown Chicago, glass walls glowing with late morning light, polished oak table stretching nearly 20 feet long, 5 panelists seated across from her in tailored suits and curated confidence. Vanessa didn't react. She didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't offer the polite smile most candidates would force in that moment. Instead, she set her leather portfolio gently on the table, uncapped her pen, and wrote something down. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Vanessa Hale. Mark Ellison, the hiring director, leaned back in his chair like he had already closed the file on her. Mid-50s, silver hair, navy suit, the kind of man who measured people in seconds and dismissed them in half that time. He tapped a printed copy of her resume with one finger. Your background is unconventional, he added, voice smooth but edged. The others followed his lead, subtle glances, tight smiles, a woman on the panel crossing her arms as if bracing against something unseen. Vanessa finally looked up, her gaze steady, unreadable. How do you define leadership here? She asked, voice calm, precise. The question didn't match the script. A brief pause rippled across the table. Mark blinked once, then smirked. We define it by results, he said. And presentation. He let the last word hang. Vanessa nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away. To his left, a younger associate shifted in his seat, glancing at Vanessa again, longer this time. Something about her composure didn't match the role they had already assigned to her. No nervous tapping. No over-explaining. No effort to impress. Just stillness. The kind that made noise feel unnecessary. Tell us, another panelist chimed in, flipping through her resume, why you think you belong in a senior executive role? At a firm like this. There it was again. Belong. Vanessa's pen paused for half a second before continuing to move. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at each person at the table, one by one, like she was memorizing more than faces, like she was measuring something deeper. That's an interesting question, she said finally. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Across the table, Mark leaned forward slightly, sensing control slipping in ways he couldn't name. It's a standard one, he replied. Vanessa closed her portfolio with a soft click. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the room. No, she said, meeting his eyes directly now. It's not. And for the first time since she walked in, the room didn't feel like an interview anymore. It felt like something else entirely, something none of them had prepared for. The silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt loaded, like the room itself was waiting to see who would reclaim control first. Mark Ellison exhaled slowly, leaning back again as if resetting the power dynamic by posture alone. Then enlighten us, he said, his tone now sharper, less polished. Vanessa did not rush. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer, a small, precise movement, then rested her hands on the table. Belonging is not something you ask when you already decided the answer, she said evenly. A flicker crossed the face of the woman to Mark's right, subtle but real. The younger associate straightened slightly, his pen hovering above his notepad but no longer moving. Mark gave a short laugh, dismissive, practiced. You are reading too much into a standard process, he replied. We evaluate candidates based on fit, experience, and alignment with our culture. Vanessa tilted her head just slightly, studying him, not reacting to the dismissal but absorbing it. Culture, she repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. Defined by whom? That question did not land comfortably. One of the panelists shifted in his chair, clearing his throat, eyes dropping to the table for a brief second. Mark's jaw tightened, just enough to be noticeable if someone was paying attention. Vanessa was. We are not here to debate philosophy, Mark said, his voice firmer now. We are here to assess whether you can operate at this level. Vanessa nodded once, slow and deliberate. And I am here to understand how this level operates, she replied. There was no challenge in her tone, no aggression, just clarity. And that made it harder to push back. The air in the room grew denser, like the temperature had shifted without anyone touching the thermostat. Vanessa reached into her portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper, not handing it over yet, just placing it in front of her. The motion was calm, controlled, intentional. Mark's eyes flicked down to it instinctively, then back up to her face. Let us continue, he said quickly, as if trying to regain pace. Walk us through your leadership experience. Vanessa did not open the document. She did not glance at notes. She looked directly at him. Which part would you like? She asked. The part you would believe, or the part you would question. The younger associate's pen dropped onto the table with a soft click. No one laughed this time. Mark's expression hardened, but there was something underneath it now, something less certain. Just answer the question, he said. Vanessa leaned back slightly, finally allowing a hint of ease into her posture. I have spent the last 15 years building, acquiring, and restructuring companies across 3 states, she said. Most of those decisions were made in rooms where I was told, directly or indirectly, that I did not belong. She paused, just long enough for the words to settle. So I stopped asking for permission. The room went still again, but this time it was different. This time, it was not dismissal filling the space. It was recognition that something about this interview was no longer following their script. And Vanessa Hale was not here to follow anything they had prepared. Mark Ellison did not speak right away, and that hesitation was new, subtle but unmistakable, like a crack forming beneath a surface that had always appeared solid. He tapped his pen once against the table, then again, a rhythm that felt more like a distraction than control. 15 years is a long time, he said. Finally, his voice measured but tighter now. Yet I do not see any tenure at firms comparable to ours. Vanessa's gaze did not shift. That is because I was not working for them, she replied. I was building around them. The words did not rise in volume, but they carried weight, the kind that made people sit differently without realizing it. Across the table, the woman who had crossed her arms earlier slowly uncrossed them, her posture softening just enough to signal a shift in attention. The younger associate leaned forward now, elbows lightly touching the edge of the table, no longer pretending disinterest. Mark noticed it. Of course he did. His eyes moved briefly across his own panel before returning to Vanessa. Building what exactly? He asked. Vanessa slid the single sheet of paper she had placed earlier a few inches forward, not enough for anyone else to read, just enough to acknowledge its presence. Structures that do not rely on approval to exist, she said. Mark let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost a scoff, but not quite. That sounds abstract, he replied. Vanessa nodded once. It does until you see the results. The room held that sentence longer than expected. One of the panelists shifted his chair slightly, the soft movement echoing louder than it should have. The younger associate finally spoke, his voice careful but genuine. What kind of acquisitions? He asked. Mark turned his head slightly toward him, not sharply, but enough to signal that the question was not part of the plan. Vanessa noticed that too. She always noticed. Mid-size companies undervalued due to internal inefficiencies, she answered. Most of them overlooked because leadership focused more on image than structure. Mark's jaw set again, but this time he did not interrupt. Vanessa continued, her tone unchanged. I corrected that. There was no emphasis, no flourish, just a statement delivered with the certainty of something already proven. The woman on the panel leaned forward slightly now, eyes narrowing in concentration rather than skepticism. And you did this independently? She asked. Vanessa met her gaze. Not alone, she said, but without needing validation from rooms like this. The words settled differently this time. Not defensive. Not reactive. Just clear. Mark leaned forward again, placing both hands flat on the table as if grounding himself back into authority. "You are in this room now," he said. Vanessa did not hesitate. "Yes," she replied. "And I am learning exactly why." That was the moment the energy shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that everyone in the room felt it without being able to name it. This was no longer a candidate trying to earn approval. And whatever this had become, it was no longer something Mark Ellison fully controlled. The room did not reset after that moment, it tilted, subtly but permanently, like gravity itself had shifted direction. Mark Ellison straightened his tie, a small adjustment that did nothing to restore the control he thought he still had. "Let us stay focused," he said, his tone sharper now, less composed than before. "This is not a philosophy session. This is a leadership evaluation." Vanessa did not respond immediately. She watched him, not with defiance, not with submission, but with the kind of attention that made people aware of themselves in ways they did not expect. "Then let us evaluate leadership," she said calmly. "How do you handle ethical failure at the executive level?" The question landed differently. It was not part of their script. It was not something candidates usually asked. The woman on the panel glanced at Mark instinctively, waiting for him to take the lead. He did not answer right away. Instead, he leaned back again, crossing one leg over the other, buying himself a second. "We have protocols," he said. "Internal reviews, compliance measures, escalation paths." Vanessa nodded slowly, as if checking boxes on an invisible list. "And when those fail?" she asked. A pause stretched across the table. The younger associate looked up, his eyes moving between Mark and Vanessa, sensing something deeper unfolding. Mark's jaw tightened again. "They do not fail," he replied. Vanessa held his gaze. "They do," she said, not as an argument, but as a fact. The air in the room felt heavier now, like every word carried more consequence than anyone had planned for. One of the panelists shifted uncomfortably, adjusting papers that did not need adjusting. The woman who had softened earlier leaned forward slightly, her voice quieter when she spoke. "What would you do?" she asked Vanessa. That question changed everything. It was no longer about fitting in. It was about understanding. Vanessa turned her head slightly toward her, acknowledging the shift. "I would not wait for a system to correct itself," she said. "I would intervene before failure becomes normalized." No one spoke after that. Even Mark remained still, his usual interruptions absent. Vanessa's fingers rested lightly on the edge of her portfolio, not gripping, not tense, just present. She glanced once at the glass walls, at the skyline beyond, then back at the table. "Because by the time everyone agrees something is broken," she continued, "the damage has already been accepted." The younger associate nodded almost imperceptibly, catching himself too late. Mark noticed. Again. His control was not just slipping in the conversation, it was slipping in the room itself. "You speak as if you have seen this before," Mark said, trying to pull the narrative back into safer territory. Vanessa's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "More than once," she replied. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The silence that followed was not empty anymore. It was observant. Measuring. Waiting. And somewhere between the questions and the answers, between the assumptions and the reality unfolding in front of them, one thing had become clear to everyone in that room, even if they had not said it out loud yet. Vanessa Hale was not here to be evaluated. She was here to evaluate them. The questions still hung in the air, unanswered, but no longer ignored. Mark Ellison shifted forward again, this time slower, more deliberate, as if recalibrating his approach in real time. "Experience is one thing," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled. "But leadership at this level requires refinement. Presence. Alignment." He paused, letting the words settle, then added with a faint smile that did not reach his eyes, "and not everyone develops that." The implication was clear. It did not need to be stated directly. Vanessa's gaze did not waver. She had heard variations of that sentence before, dressed differently, delivered in different rooms, but always carrying the same message. For a brief second, her fingers stilled against the edge of her portfolio, and something quieter moved beneath her composure, not visible, but present. A memory. 22 years earlier, a smaller room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a folding table instead of polished oak. She had been 23, fresh out of graduate school, wearing her best navy suit, the one she saved for interviews. The man across from her had looked at her resume, then at her, then back again, like something did not match. "You are impressive," he had said, his tone almost rehearsed. "But I am not sure you are the right fit for our clients." She had nodded back then. Thanked him. Walked out without arguing. Sat in her car for 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel, not because she did not understand what he meant, but because she understood it too well. The pattern had not changed. Only the rooms had. Vanessa blinked once, returning to the present without a shift in posture. Mark was still watching her, expecting something now, a reaction, a defense, something he could categorize. She gave him none of it. "Define refinement," she said instead. The question was simple, but it did not feel small. Mark hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Communication style. Professional polish. The ability to represent the company in the right environments, he replied. Vanessa nodded slowly, as if weighing each word. "So presentation determines capability?" she asked. "It reflects it," Mark corrected quickly. Vanessa leaned back slightly, her expression calm but sharper now. "That assumption has cost companies more than they realize," she said. The woman on the panel glanced down at her notes, then back up, her attention fully engaged now. The younger associate did not even pretend to write anymore. Mark exhaled, his patience thinning. "We are not discussing theory," he said. Vanessa met his gaze without hesitation. "Neither am I," she replied. The room tightened again, the kind of tension that does not explode but compresses, building pressure in silence. Vanessa's voice did not rise, but it carried further now. "Every time someone is overlooked because they do not match an expectation, you are not filtering risk," she said. "You are creating it." No one interrupted her. Not this time. The weight of her words settled across the table, pressing into the spaces where assumptions had been sitting comfortably just minutes before. Mark opened his mouth to respond, then stopped, the sentence not forming as easily as it had earlier. And in that pause, longer than any before it, something became undeniable. This was no longer a conversation he could steer back to familiar ground. And Vanessa Hale was not revisiting the past. She was closing it. Mark Ellison did not recover immediately this time, and that delay said more than anything he could have said out loud. His fingers pressed lightly against the table, not tapping now, just resting there as if grounding himself in something that no longer felt stable. Vanessa watched him, not with satisfaction, not with tension, but with a quiet certainty that had been building from the moment she walked in. "Let us move forward," Mark said finally, his voice controlled again but thinner, like it had lost something on the way back. "Tell us how you would integrate into our executive team." Vanessa did not answer right away. Instead, she reached for her phone, not abruptly, not defensively, just as part of a sequence she had already decided. She unlocked it with a single motion, her eyes never leaving Mark. "Before I answer that," she said, "I need to confirm something." The panel exchanged brief glances, confusion replacing the earlier confidence that had filled the room. Mark frowned slightly. "This is not the time for side matters," he said. Vanessa tilted her head just enough to acknowledge him, then placed the phone face down on the table. "It is directly related," she replied. Her tone did not shift, but the weight behind it did. She tapped the screen once, activating a call. It rang only once before connecting. "Carla," Vanessa said, her voice calm, steady. "I am in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. I need you to pull up the acquisition file for Ellison Group and confirm status." There was a pause on the other end, then a voice responded, precise and immediate. Yes, Miss Hale. One moment. The room did not breathe the same way after that. The younger associate sat back slowly, his eyes fixed on Vanessa now, no longer trying to interpret her, just watching. The woman on the panel straightened, her posture shifting from evaluator to observer. Mark's expression tightened, but he did not interrupt. Not this time. He was listening now. Truly listening. Vanessa's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table as she waited, her composure unchanged, as if this was not an interruption but the natural next step. File is open. Carla's voice came back through the phone. Ellison Group acquisition finalized this morning at 9:23 a.m. Central Time. Full controlling interest transferred. The words landed softly, but they did not feel light. They settled into the room like something irreversible. Mark blinked once, then again, his mind catching up to what had just been said. Confirm primary authority, Vanessa continued. Primary authority assigned to Hale Ventures, Carla replied. You are listed as executive oversight. Vanessa nodded slightly, not for the room, but for herself. Thank you, she said, then ended the call with a single tap. The silence that followed was not confusion anymore. It was realization, slow but undeniable. Vanessa looked back at Mark, her gaze steady, unchanged, but now fully understood. To answer your question, she said, her voice even, I would not be integrating into your executive team. She paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle into every corner of the room. I would be restructuring it. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without shifting her posture, Vanessa Hale did not take control of the room. She revealed that she had it all along. No one spoke immediately, not because they did not want to, but because no one in that room knew what could possibly follow what had just been said. The skyline outside the glass. Walls had not changed, the city still moving, cars still flowing through intersections far below, but inside that conference room everything had shifted into something still, something heavy. Mark Ellison's lips parted slightly, then closed again, his usual confidence replaced by something far less certain. He looked down at the table, then at the paper in front of Vanessa, then back at her face as if searching for any sign that this was a misunderstanding. There was none. Vanessa did not move. She did not lean forward, did not press the moment, did not fill the silence. She let it expand, let it do the work for her. The younger associate was the first to react, though even that reaction was quiet. Hale Ventures, he said under his breath, almost to himself, as if the name had just clicked into place somewhere deeper than recognition. The woman on the panel inhaled slowly, her posture no longer that of someone evaluating a candidate, but of someone recalculating everything she thought she understood about the last 20 minutes. Mark finally spoke, but his voice had changed. It was lower now, stripped of the polished certainty he had carried into the room. There must be some confusion, he said, though the words sounded less like a challenge and more like a hope. Vanessa met his gaze without hesitation. There is not, she replied. Simple. Direct. Final. Mark leaned back in his chair, the movement slower than before, as if even his body needed to adjust to the reality settling in. His eyes moved briefly to the others on the panel, searching for alignment, for support, for anything that would restore the structure he had relied on. He found none. The room was no longer his to direct. Vanessa reached forward and finally slid the single sheet of paper across the table. This time, it did not stop halfway. It moved all the way to Mark. He looked down at it, his hand hovering for a moment before picking it up. The document was clean, precise, unmistakable. Acquisition confirmation. Timestamped. Signed. Verified. His name printed clearly under the section labeled Current Leadership Structure. The implications did not need explanation. His grip tightened slightly, then loosened, the paper lowering just enough for him to look back up at her. Vanessa's expression had not changed. No satisfaction. No anger. Just clarity. You asked me how I would integrate, she said, her voice calm, steady, unshaken. The better question is why this structure was allowed to operate the way it has. The words did not accuse. They exposed. The woman on the panel shifted again, this time not out of discomfort but awareness. The younger associate leaned back fully now, his earlier notes forgotten entirely. Mark opened his mouth again, but the response did not come as quickly as it had before. For the first time since Vanessa walked into that room, he was not leading the conversation. He was inside it. And as the weight of that realization settled, it became clear to everyone present that the interview had not just ended. It had been something else entirely. Something designed. Something observed. Something judged. And the verdict had already been decided. No one reached for their phone, no one interrupted, no one even shifted too quickly, because the room had crossed into something fragile, something that could not be undone with a quick comment or a forced reset. Mark Ellison lowered the document slowly onto the table, his fingers lingering on the edge as if holding onto the last piece of control he could still touch. The silence stretched, not awkward, not empty, but decisive. Vanessa Hale did not rush it. She allowed every second to settle, every realization to fully land before she spoke again. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice calm, measured. "This interview process is suspended." The words were not loud, but they carried authority that did not need reinforcement. The woman on the panel straightened instinctively, as if responding to a directive rather than a statement. The younger associate sat completely still, his attention fixed on Vanessa with a clarity that had not been there before. Mark inhaled slowly, then exhaled, his shoulders lowering just slightly. "Vanessa," he said, using her first name now without thinking, the shift subtle but undeniable. "This can be handled internally. There is no need to escalate based on a single interaction." Vanessa's gaze remained steady. "This is not based on a single interaction," she replied. "It is based on a pattern." The word landed heavier than anything before it. Pattern. Not isolated. Not accidental. Established. Observed. Measured. She reached for her phone again, not hurried, not dramatic, simply continuing a process already in motion. "Carla," she said once the line connected. "Initiate executive review protocol. I want all hiring transcripts from the last 12 months flagged for language and decision bias indicators. Start with senior leadership panels." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Understood," Carla replied. "Beginning review now." Vanessa ended the call and placed the phone back on the table, her movements as controlled as they had been from the beginning. Mark's expression tightened again, but this time it was not resistance, it was recognition. He understood what was happening. Not emotionally. Structurally. The system he had operated within, the one he had trusted to remain invisible, was now being examined from above. "You are overreacting," he said, though the conviction behind the words had weakened. Vanessa did not respond immediately. She looked at each person at the table again, the same way she had earlier, but now the meaning behind it had changed. "No," she said finally. "I am responding proportionally." The woman on the panel lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back up, something like accountability replacing the earlier uncertainty. The younger associate shifted in his chair, his posture no longer neutral, but aligned. Mark glanced toward the glass walls, toward the city beyond, as if searching for distance from the moment unfolding inside the room. He found none. Vanessa's voice remained steady, but there was something final in it now. "Leadership is not tested when everything is comfortable," she said. "It is revealed when assumptions are challenged." No one argued that. Not anymore. The room had already answered that question for itself. Vanessa stood then, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that marked the end of something none of them had fully understood at the beginning. She gathered her portfolio, her movements precise, controlled, unchanged. "This was never about whether I belonged here," she said, looking directly at Mark. "It was about whether this place was built to deserve leadership at all." And with that, the structure they had relied on, the certainty they had carried into that room, did not collapse loudly. It dissolved quietly, under the weight of truth they could no longer ignore. The door did not slam when Vanessa Hale walked out. It closed softly, almost quietly, but the sound echoed longer than anything that had been said inside that room. No one moved at first. The city beyond the glass walls kept going, cars moving, people crossing streets, life continuing without pause, but inside the conference room everything had slowed to something heavier, something reflective. Mark Ellison remained seated, his hands resting flat on the table where moments earlier he had tried to assert control. Now they were still. Completely still. The document in front of him had not moved, but its meaning had. He looked at it again, not reading it this time, just seeing it, understanding it in a way that did not require interpretation. Across from him, the woman on the panel exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering as if releasing something she had been holding for longer than she realized. She glanced toward the door, then back at the table, her expression no longer guarded, no longer performative, but thoughtful. The younger associate leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the space Vanessa had just occupied, as if trying to replay every moment, every question, every answer with a new understanding. She knew, he said quietly, not asking, not guessing, just stating what had become obvious. No one corrected him. No one needed to. Mark finally shifted, his fingers pressing lightly against the edge of the document before sliding it a few inches away, as if distance could change what it represented. "This is not how this was supposed to go," he muttered, though the words sounded less like frustration and more like realization. The woman on the panel looked at him, not sharply, not critically, but directly. "Maybe it went exactly how it was supposed to," she said. The room absorbed that. No one rushed to respond. The younger associate nodded once, almost unconsciously, his posture no longer aligned with the structure that had existed before Vanessa entered. Something had shifted in him too. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. Mark leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the glass wall, toward the skyline he had looked at countless times before without ever questioning what it represented. Today felt different. Today it looked like something he had been part of building without ever examining the foundation. He exhaled again, slower this time. "We will review the process," he said finally, though his voice no longer carried the authority it once did. It carried something else now. Awareness. The woman on the panel nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement.